Tonight's big stories. After all the uproar, Vice President Sara Duterte gives up her request for 650 million pesos in confidential funds for next year.
Thousands of Philippine and U.S. Marine troops, along with personnel from Japan and South Korea, begin their two-week joint drills, seen as a show of force amid maritime tensions.
And the Energy Regulatory Commission says that the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines may be asked to refund customers after investigations revealed that the operator earned more than what it was allowed from 2016 to 2022.
Welcome to the show. I'm Regina.
I'm Gretchen.
And I'm Shawn.
We're kicking off tonight with a joint exercise between Philippine troops and allied countries known as Kamandag 7. Kamandag is an abbreviation for Kaagapay ng mga mandirigma ng dagat, or in English, Cooperation of the Warriors of the Sea. Again, this is the 7th iteration. Over 1,000 Philippine Marines are doing joint drills with their counterparts from the U.S., Japan, and South Korea. The exercises include amphibious landing drills, coastal defense, special operations, and disaster response in key military locations like Batanes, Zambales, and Palawan. Troops from the United Kingdom will also join as observers. This is considered the biggest set of drills to date with the country's defense allies, which will run until November 20. Military officials insist, though, that the drills are not in response to the recent incidents in the West Philippine Sea.
This particular exercise will not be directed against a particular issue, particularly the West Philippine Sea.
So recent events don't have anything to bear on it. Kamandag is all about working together, interoperability, learning from each other, and to meet training objectives.
I didn't know that that acronym. It was an acronym kasi nisip ko Kamandag
because
is venom.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right. Which could be a good name for it, I guess.
I mean, depends what you're trying to.
Yeah. Well, sabi ni Lieutenant, was he a lieutenant? Interoperability daw to. This is not about anything else. Okay.
Well, this is the first time that Japan and South Korea are joining the drills.
And this is, I think, it's the biggest one because there's a lot of observers. There will be observers from Australia as well as the United Kingdom.
Well, more than 1,700 will be coming from the Philippine Marines. About 900 U.S. soldiers would train alongside 50 from the Japanese Self-Defense Forces, while 57 South Korean and 8 British Marines will also join. The United Kingdom Armed Forces will bring observers, as we mentioned, to the Kamandag 7. Now, this will be the 7th edition of the Marine Corps after both the United States and the Philippines agreed to replace the former PHIBLEX drills in 2016, which former President Rodrigo Duterte ordered scrap for holding amphibious drills in coastal areas facing the West Philippine Sea. I hear they will be doing this one in Batanes, Metro Manila, Palawan, Zamboanga, and Tawi-Tawi this time around.
So all areas, some of them with EDCA sites, I should point out. Yeah.
All along the western coastline.
But again, interoperability daw.
Sa baba rin sa south din.
Pero it's all of the west. Kasi Tawi-Tawi is still the west.
Key coastlines, that's right.
Medyo hindi lang west yung Batanes. Medyo nasa north-north talaga yun. And of course, that faces Taiwan. Now, I'm just stating it as a fact because interoperability lang naman talaga. Yung
according to the officials. But also, we would be remiss if we don't point out that this is also coming on the heels of a, shall we say, show of force amongst our allies, right? Just recently, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida was in town for a 2-day visit where a visiting forces agreement was discussed. This is their way and the Philippines' way of stepping up defense ties, as they said. He also addressed a special session of Congress, the first Japanese Prime Minister to do so. He called the Philippines an irreplaceable partner. In that he said that the country was crucial in maintaining an open international order based on the rule of law. Although, again, there was no specific mention of China.
But there was specific mention of the United States.
That's right.
Yeah. So at least all the cards are on the table.
Yeah, we can connect the dots ourselves.
Apart from interoperability, I believe the United States will also be helping us when it comes to cybersecurity and also how to access the cyberspace data that we need to protect our coastal areas.
And a lot of the times, we don't
Maybe
really...
PhilHealth should dial into that. Or,
Not
sorry.
just PhilHealth.
I couldn't help it.
Also Congress.
Yun yung i-address daw nila.
Okay, so
dahil
cyber
sa hacks,
hacking,
yung cyber
which we really need.
Yes.
We need to
and
beef
the
up the
cyberspace
expertise, yes.
technologies that they have.
Right. Well, Filipinos apparently should not have anything to say on the contrary, because according to a Pulse Asia survey, the countries that Filipinos want economic ties with are the United States, 74%, Japan, 55%, Australia, 46%, and Canada, 40%.
Those are not surprising. That's always been historically the case, that the trust rating for these allied countries have always been pretty high. Okay, we're going to jump into our first interview now, and here to talk about what we can expect from all these defense alliances and joint drills, we have a very special guest tonight, Defense Secretary Gilbert Teodoro. Secretary, good evening. Thank you for joining us. You're a little bit muffled, and I'm wondering if you have the mic on.
I'm trying to
there you go.
keep it as possible, so sorry for speaking a bit muffled.
Okay, let's try it like this. But if you could just move the mic a little bit closer so we could hear you better, that'll be fantastic.
How's this?
Yes,
That
that's
sounds
better.
great.
Yeah. Let's kick
All
off
right.
with the joint drills, Kamandag 7. What are we expecting out of it?
Well, it's the latest iteration of joint combined activities, rather, that were planned early on this year. We will see a more interoperability exercises, a broader set of problem skills that the combined forces need to solve, and more objectives that they need to meet. Next year's activities also, which are being planned already this early, will have more asymmetry in the scenario, and we hope for more interoperability exercises with the like-minded and allied forces.
Are you expecting any reactions from China, Secretary Teodoro? Of course, lately things have been heating up, as well as the frequency of these quote-unquote encounters with China in the West Philippine Sea and the South China Sea. How would this tie in to those events? Because to not talk about it and just connect them would perhaps just garner a lot of raised eyebrows.
Yeah, as I said, these activities cannot be undertaken without extensive planning. Hence, these were pre-planned at the beginning of this year, so it's not a reaction to the latest events in the West Philippine Sea. However, of course, I'd be really naive if people will not connect it. But then again, I really am aware that there may be some connections. However, whatever reaction China has is beside the point. These joint exercises are being undertaken by partners of choice of the Philippines within our territory. So it should be no concern of theirs or any other country who has other views on the matter.
Well, Japan Prime Minister Fumio Kishida paid a visit recently to the Philippines, sending a very, very strong statement as an ally of our country. They are giving us aid, additional patrol boats, that's part of that. And also, he also mentioned a reciprocal access agreement. What is the difference of that agreement with a mutual defense treaty, and how will that help our security situation?
A mutual defense treaty is the obligation of one country to come to the aid of another country in case of an armed attack, such as the mutual defense treaty between us and the United States. The reciprocal access agreement is akin to a visiting forces agreement, which will allow greater presence and more substantial presence on a rotational basis of Japanese troops for greater interoperability with Philippine Defense Forces, and vice versa. It will allow Philippine troops to access Japan for joint exercises with Japan within a legal framework.
Right, at this point in time and in the conversation, Secretary, may I ask what are the updates with our EDCA sites? We know that just a few days ago, there was something in Florida Blanca in Camp Cesar Basa where a runway apparently has been finished in about a year, which is really, really quick. And it cost something like 1.3 billion. How are the other infrastructures shaping up? How are they looking at this point in time?
Well, we're still concentrating on the first four EDCA sites, and we will begin activities as soon as possible on the next five agreed upon EDCA sites. So it can't be too soon. It can't be any sooner. However, we're trying to go on speed as quickly as possible. And mind you, the inauguration of the Basa Airbase runway extension also showcase the Filipino contractors who were chosen by the United States to undertake the projects using Filipino labor and Filipino private enterprise to do.
Right, I should say, Secretary, that I am quite impressed at the pace of the completion of these infrastructure with local contractors and local workers. So kaya naman pala.
Kaya basta, the challenge in any enterprise now, whether in government or in the private sector, is front-loading, pre-planning because of the supply chain problems. So this is an issue everyone really faces, any enterprise, whether private or public. So we really have to plan well ahead and really quickly act in order to secure our supply chains.
Secretary, we talked about the reciprocal access agreement. You said it was like a visiting forces agreement.
Yes.
Is it possible to have joint maritime patrols with the Japanese? How about with the Americans and also Australians? How are those talks going?
You don't need any talks. You don't need any agreements to undertake joint patrols or joint sails. And our armed forces and their armed forces are talking amongst themselves as to the operational details of this. We don't need separate agreements for that with any like-minded country.
What about joint resupply mission, Secretary? Will we be seeing that? That is a more concrete, I think, problem, if we can call it that. Of course, our resupply missions have been hounded by Chinese militia vessels and Chinese Coast Guard. There has been mention that we might hold joint resupply missions with other countries. Is there any truth to this, and how would that be carried out?
None on my table. None on my table yet. It has not been recommended.
Okay, thanks for clearing that.
But if we're not gonna have those joint resupply missions, paano po kaya natin mapoprotektahan yung forces natin at sea? Alam po natin, we've seen this escalate. I mean, as far as we know, from laser pointing to water cannon incident, ngayon nagkaroon na po ng collision. Siyempre, ang tatanong po natin, what's next? Ano? Paano po natin kaya mapoprotektahan yung ating mga ipinapadala?
We're following a strategy and an operational philosophy that we really cannot talk about. Suffice it to state that we remain undeterred in our operations in the West Philippine Sea, and we will overcome challenges as they crop up.
And then also, President Marcos named Teddy Boy Locsin as a special envoy to China for special concerns. Secretary, I wonder if you could give us a better sense of how you two are working together. I mean, I know, of course, your remit is much larger than just China, but it is what's taking up a lot of space right now. So I wonder if you could give us a better sense of what the dynamic is between the two of you and how you're working together on this.
Right now, there's no direct interaction between Ambassador Locsin and myself. The only interactions I have are with the DFA.
So you take your cue from the DFA, essentially.
We work together and we take our cue from the president.
Okay.
Okay. What about, can you elaborate more, Secretary, about this Instagram post that I saw from your account? Also, the billboard on EDSA about Chinese sleeper cells. Can you clarify for the benefit of everybody who is tuned in right now?
No billboard on Chinese sleeper cells, I think that was not, there was no DND pronouncement on the existence of Chinese sleeper cells. I think that came from another agency. And the billboard was a, how should I say, a cropping from an interview I gave regarding the creeping expansionism of China. And a billboard, electronic billboard owner who took it upon himself to post it without my knowledge. Now, in terms of the sleeper cells, I heard it pronounced by another agency, I believe, not us. So that being the case, all intelligence agencies are on the lookout for espionage or external subversion from any source, for that matter. That is not only sleeper cells of X country, but it may be extremist terrorism and other disruptive, subversive efforts. No? So it behooves any security organization to try to be as vigilant as possible to guard against the effects of these. As a matter of fact, in other countries, they have caught, in the United Kingdom, for example, 5 foreign agents were just recently arrested on spying for submarine secrets. In the United States, likewise. So it behooves any country to be vigilant for not only espionage sleeper cells, but planters of fake propaganda or disinformation.
Speaking of that concern, confidential funds have been reallocated to our security agencies. And we had Attorney Harry Roque on the show months ago, and he said nga po na hindi naman po daw nangangailangan ng confidential funds ang ating Philippine Coast Guard dahil parang ang kailangan lang daw po ng Philippine Coast Guard ay to get satellite images of what's happening in the West Philippine Sea. We wanted to get clarity on that, on the use of confidential funds in an agency such as the PCG. Do you think it's essential for the agency to get some?
The West Philippine Sea actually is just an extension duty of the Philippine Coast Guard. The main duty of the Philippine Coast Guard is criminality internally and on sea, and anti-smuggling, marine transportation safety, anti-hijacking on sea, anti-pilferage on sea, and anti-drug operations at sea within our internal waters. That's why it's the Coast Guard. So definitely it needs confidential funds. The West Philippine Sea is an extra duty of the Philippine Coast Guard in connection with civilian vessels therein, the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources, and the Philippine Navy. Hence the need for confidential funds for the Philippine Coast Guard. It performs law enforcement operations. So definitely it needs these kinds of funds. If not, we'll just lay open our intelligence plans to the whole world to see.
From what you've seen, have the confi funds, the secret funds that were given to PCG over the past several years been enough?
I cannot speak for them. I just can speak of the general proposition that they do need confidential funds, being a law enforcement agency.
All right. Okay, and then I also wanted to ask you about the, I don't know if you had a chance to read the article on the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, where apparently there's a small group but very vocal group of group that parrots Beijing's narratives. This is a very pro-China group, to the point that National Security Council Assistant Director General Jonathan Malaya has gotten on to monitoring them. And I wonder if that's also a concern for you, the pro-Beijing narrative that's, you know, taken root in certain sectors of society.
Naturally, it is a concern because it goes against the security and the defense thrusts of the administration and the government. It is a concern. However, we live in a democracy where everybody has freedom of speech. And so it's the marketplace of the ideas which will be the main arbiter of this debate. So I'll leave it at that.
All right,
It isn't something that you're overly concerned about, shall we say, at this point.
I do not think so, given the trust ratings of the countries that you just pointed out earlier. And we have to include also South Korea, New Zealand, Canada in that list, no? Together with France, Italy, Germany, and a host of other EU countries who are supporting our efforts in the West Philippine Sea, because we're not really fighting for sole value of the Philippines, but the Philippines stands for a rules-based international order, international law, and the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So that's why a lot of countries are joining our crusade. Now, it really doesn't concern me a lot because the propaganda parroted is actually it serves to alienate the Beijing line from the Filipino people.
All right, Secretary, one last question before we let you go. How is modernization going for the AFP? What new toys do we have? What new gadgets? To make us feel, us citizens, normal citizens, feel safer, knowing that our armed forces has enough, stuff in case of anything.
Before the toys and gadgets, we have to know what's happening, and that's being front loaded right now. Our maritime, aerial, and other domain awareness to include cyber. So much so that the first official security assistance grant by the Japanese government was asked for a coastal defense radar. We have lots of domain awareness equipment that are coming in. Now, we have re-horizoned once again our requirements in order to include our exclusive economic zone within our area of primary operations. So we will be coming out with a re-horizoned Horizon 3 for our wish lists to make our capabilities interoperable, sustainable, and on a building block basis, so that we do not get equipment piecemeal, but with a logical and strategic framework in mind. Fortunately, we've had very, very cooperative stakeholders. Our president, number one, our legislature, who have been really trying to help and support us, not only with the funding, but even the amendment of the modernization and procurement law to enable us to make more intelligent and secure acquisitions and capability upgrades in the future. We're also very busy revising our systems, increasing our human capacities, our human resource capacities by educating a more thorough drive on project management, education, and a multidisciplinary appreciation of security threats of the country. And finally, we'd like to thank the Filipino people for the consistent high trust ratings that the defense establishment has been receiving.
Well, we do appreciate that you're a very busy man, so we're going to let you go. But thank you so much for your time tonight, and we hope to have you back again soon. That was Defense Secretary Gilbert Teodoro.
Thank you.
Up next, after much public backlash, Vice President and DepEd Secretary Sara Duterte drops her request for confidential funds. More details on that when we return. Welcome back. You're still watching the big story here on One News. After months of heated debates over the controversial confidential funds, Vice President Sara Duterte has decided to give them up. We see in this video Duterte blowing a kiss to members of the media when she arrived at the Senate for the budget deliberations for the Office of the Vice President and the Education Department. Recall that the Senate adopted the lower house's decision to cut both departments' confidential and intelligence funds in the General Appropriations Bill. But when asked by Senate Minority Leader Coco Pimentel at the plenary if she wants to appeal the restoration of the OVP's 500 million peso confidential funds, the Vice President says she has given up on them. Here's Senate Finance Committee Chairman Sonny Angara reading the Vice President's statement.
We're in receipt of a statement from the Vice President we discussed earlier. And according to her, the OVP can only propose a budget to support the safe implementation of its PAPs or programs, activities and programs to alleviate poverty and promote the general welfare of each and every Filipino family. Nonetheless, they will no longer pursue the CIF or CF. And the reason why is because it is seen to be divisive, and as the Vice President, she swore an oath to keep the country peaceful and strong.
Vice President, I commend her, Mr. President, for now categorically stating to this House that it's not a deferral to our wisdom. She does not want it anymore. That settles everything, Mr.
Now, in a separate session for the DepEd budget, Duterte's team also announced that they are letting go of the agency's proposed 150 million pesos in confidential funds for 2024. They are instead requesting for the money to be reallocated to the agency's National Learning Recovery Program.
We are all parents who want to protect our children. Ang seguridad ng mga bata ay seguridad ng kinabukasan ng ating bayan. Nonetheless, DepEd will no longer pursue confidential funds.
So, ang haba-haba ng prosesyon. Sa give up din pala. Nag-end.
But, I mean, to be fair, as we were following the story, we didn't know that this is what it's going to come to, right? Diba?
I think it was
She could have fought for it, continued. There was a little bit of support in the Senate, diba?
There was, but it's gone now.
Pero
And
naalala mo, sinabi niya, kapag ikaw ay against the confidential funds, ikaw
against
rin ay
kasabayan.
sa kapayapaan. Laban ka, pag ikaw ay kumukontra sa confidential funds, ikaw ay kumukontra sa kapayapaan. At ang kontra sa kapayapaan ay kalaban ng bayan.
Before that, so timeline of events tayo, before that she said, I could live without them. Then it became a bit more combative, which is the quote that you just read. And then eventually to, well, okay.
Eventually, everyone decided to join the fray, including her father, who lambasted Congress for not giving in. And now we have this whole
all-out war between former President Duterte and lower house and Congress, right?
with a death threat even to Franz Castro. And
Clashing over this confidential funds issue. So I guess after all of that, they decided, okay, let's let it go.
And again, final answer na yan because Senate President Zubiri actually asked the Vice President, pwede pa naman daw ibalik sa BICAM. Ang sabi ni VP Duterte, di bale na lang.
And her official statement is here, spoken by the spokesperson of the Vice President, Michael Powell. Let's listen in.
Ang Office of the Vice President ay maaari lamang magmungkahi ng kaukulan o karapat-dapat na budget para sa maayos na implementasyon ng mga proyekto. Pero ganun pa man, hindi na po ipursue, hindi na po itutuloy ng Office of the Vice President ang original na mungkahi para sa confidential funds. Bakit? Dahil po nakikita natin na talagang may tendency magkawatak-watak o magiging divisive itong issue na ito.
Nevertheless, naging usapan pa rin kanina sa Senado yung 125 million peso confidential fund transfer ng OVP. This was of course from last year, 2022. Hindi nila nakalimutan. The Senate minority also scrutinized the 5 billion pesos in CIFs that remain for the Office of the President. Let's bring in our Senate reporter, Mean Los Baños, to give us the details. Mean, anong meron? Anong bago?
Yes, Shawn, before Vice President Duterte announced her decision to no longer pursue confidential funds for the offices she leads, Senator Risa Ontiveros questioned the over 125 million peso in confidential funds that the OVP spent back in 2022. Recall that there is a petition asking the Supreme Court to deem the transfer for these funds as unconstitutional. Senator Angara explains that the funds were used to ensure the safety implementation of the OVP's projects, especially in areas affected by insurgency. Ontiveros says confidential funds are not needed for such projects, noting that the regular funds would have sufficed. In the end, the plenary approved the 1.8 billion peso budget for the OVP. Meanwhile, the Senate has swiftly approved in less than an hour the Office of the President's requested budget of 10.6 billion pesos. 2.25 billion of these are confidential funds, while 2.3 billion pesos are intelligence funds. Senate Minority Leader Coco Pimentel says he sees no problem with the OP having confidential funds, though he questioned the intelligence funds, which the lawmaker noted is only for intel gathering of uniformed and military personnel for issues of national security. But Senator Sonny Angara defends the intel fund, saying the 2.3 billion peso amount has been fixed under the National Expenditure Program since 2020. Angara adds that the intel funds are needed by the President as Commander-in-Chief when making, quote, very crucial decisions. Shawn?
Right, thanks for that, Man Los Baños.
That makes it 4.55 billion pesos next year in CIFs for the Office of the President. And although Senator Angara is correct, no, in that that's the normal allocation, we also just need to point out that it only started under President Duterte,
in 2020.
former President Duterte, meaning not that he started it, but the figure ballooned
At that time, around
under
2020.
his administration.
Dapat pala
That's
tinanong
right.
din natin kay Secretary Gilbert Teodoro kung kailangan ba ng Office of the President
Alam mo,
ng
every
confidential funds?
year naman
Parang
tinatanong
that's gonna be
yan.
very difficult to answer.
Sabagay,
He's,
sabagay.
They
the
will always say
Commander-in-Chief
he's
is
the
the
commander.
President,
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
So that's his
Although
boss.
Attorney Harry Roque was saying, hindi naman daw kailangan dahil security agencies niya ay may intelligence funds na.
Yes, pero again, no, minsan kasi nagagamit din yung mga funds na yan as contingency funds. Lalo na kung
Which is not supposed
Which
to
is
be.
exactly,
It's not supposed to
technically
be.
you're not
Because those are
allowed
not
to.
Dapat sa
discretionary
contingency
funds.
fund, eh, di ba?
Right.
Pero,
So-
syempre, may aahangal pa ba? Kunwari, may matinding sakuna na nangyari. Parang, I think doon na nagiging
Kaya
fudgy
ngayon,
yung
ang
lines.
sinisilip na nila yung contingency funds and the auditing that goes with the disbursement of those funds.
Exactly.
At hindi daw transfer yung nangyari. That's the point of debate now.
We'll see how that other debate pans out, but moving on to other stories now. Well, it's good news, bad news for consumers. First, bad news, because Meralco is hiking power rates in November, which could see an additional charge of up to 120 pesos for the average household. On the other hand, the Energy Regulatory Commission could potentially require the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, or NGCP, to refund customers a certain portion. Shiloh Francisco breaks that down for us.
Even though consumers have yet to catch their breath from the previous increases in electricity prices, here comes another additional charge from Meralco this month. The power company is raising power rates by 23 centavos per kilowatt hour in November. That's equivalent to 47 pesos for those consuming 200 kilowatt hours per month. If you're using 500 kilowatt hours, it's almost 120 peso addition to your monthly bill. According to Meralco, this is due to a spike in transmission and generation charges. The company says that the expenses of the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, or NGCP, for ancillary services have more than doubled.
So you will need backup in case of the unforeseen o kung may fortuitous situation. Tulad nga ng binanggit ni Larry, tumaas siya ng almost fourfold. Nagagamit usually ng system kung magkakaproblema at kukulangin. Diyan siya magkikick in. So there is a cost to that.
Meanwhile, the Energy Regulatory Commission has disallowed more than 200 billion pesos in expenses submitted by the NGCP for the rate resetting process covering the first phase of 2016 to 2020. The ERC did not allow certain expenses to be passed on to consumers, such as corporate social responsibility, advertising, benefits including bonuses, and additional employee salaries.
It's not that the Commission is prohibiting them, for example, from, as I mentioned earlier, from increasing the salaries of employees or giving donations. Tama naman yun. or engaging in CSR, pero hindi mo pwedeng i-recover from the rates. Why should this be charged to the consumers? This should not come from the charges to the consumers.
For their part, the NGCP countered by saying that their expenses are legitimate and are based on what the ERC had approved. They argue that it's the ERC's fault, especially for not conducting any reviews before 2016, which should have been a standard practice.
This was really a rushed process. And is it a rushed process by fault of NGCP? No. Without setting the rules prior to the period, ang hirap naman hulaan ng NGCP kung ano yung allowed, disallowed, ano ba yung levels ng budget, ano ba yung mainam, ano yung pwedeng itayo.
With this, Alabanza said that the possible refund order from the ERC is not final yet because the NGCP still has the opportunity to appeal.
Meron pa rin kaming pagkakataon sa proseso na linawin yung ibang mga findings ng ERC dito sa preliminary phase 1 initial determination.
The NGCP is scheduled to submit their comments to the ERC next week. Meanwhile, the ERC aims to complete the review before the end of the year. Shaila Francisco, VR1 News.
Well, here to speak to us about the pending NGCP refund to customers, we have with us live via Zoom ERC Chairperson Attorney Monalisa Dimalanta. Good evening, ma'am, and welcome to The Big Story.
Hi, good evening. Good evening. Good evening, Shawn, Gretchen, Regina. Good evening.
Attorney, I'm going to go straight to the point and ask you for your reaction. You heard our report. Can I have your reaction to the NGCP saying that it was the ERC's fault, please?
Yes, I think they're coming from the perspective that the reset should have happened before 2015 expired, because the last regulatory period was really 2011 to 2015. So the reset should have happened before 2015, and that's correct. It needed to have been done at that time for the regular process to occur. But you know, we are where we are, and we are doing the reset now, so we can get stuck saying what should have been done. But I think we should not lose sight of the fact that we are doing now what really should have been done before, but we make the best of what we have at this time until and we are conducting in parallel the reset already for the next period, which is really what regular programming is, which is a forecast setting of the requirements of NGCP.
Would you know what happened? I know this was before your tenure, attorney, but anong nagyari? Bakit hindi nagkaroon ng reset in between 2015 and before the start of the 2016 to 2022 period? Why was it overlooked? What happened there?
Hindi naman siguro overlooked. Meron kasing, nung tiningnan ko din kung ano ba talaga nangyari when I assumed the office in August 2022, and that was the first, I think, 3 weeks in the job, we already faced the House of Representatives for our budget, and I was, that was really the first issue that welcomed me to the ERC, that there has not been that reset on the transmission side and even on the distribution side. So I looked into what has happened. That we have seen some explanation, but I think the full picture, I really still cannot put it together, because only the commissioners that have been around then can fully explain. But some explanation would be, there was really a period, I think this is public knowledge, there was a period where there was no functioning commission, because the commissioners were suspended because there were charges filed in the ombudsman, and that led to suspension of some members of the commission. There was no quorum, so the commission could not function at that time. It did not continue. So there are various reasons for the reset not happening. But I think as I mentioned earlier, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we're doing it now, and we really want to complete this. We want to move to what NGCP also recognizes as supposed to be a forward-looking exercise in their reset.
Yes, understood, attorney. But really quickly, how do we make sure it doesn't happen again? What if a bunch of commissioners get suspended again, and it could happen again? Are you also working on a solution so that this lapse never happens again as a regulator?
Correct. We're making sure that as I mentioned earlier, while we are completing the reset for the past period, the periods that have really that have expired, like the 2016 to 2022 period, we're doing in parallel the reset for the 2023 for 2028. And as soon as we're hoping we can complete that by the first half of 2024. And then DOE, the Department of Energy, because of the requirements of investment for the grid, have already asked us, can you start early the sixth regulatory period, which is 2029 to 2034? We are preparing ourselves for that, because the sooner we give that certainty also to the investors for the grid, I think we will all be better off, because there will be certainty in what we can expect from the transmission operator in terms of the requirements. So we're doing things more diligently, more systematically, so that we avoid this situation from happening again.
Should the refund push through, how much in total would that be? And how much will each consumer get? How will you also refund that to the consumers?
Gretchen, I think it's too early for us to compute the peso per kilowatt hour that each consumer will enjoy, and maybe even NGCP would say, "Oh, ERC, you're too presumptuous to say that there's already going to be a refund," because we're still in the initial determination phase. So as mentioned, I was listening to your clips earlier, and Attorney Elebanza was correct when she said they still have the opportunity to comment, because that's due process, and that's why I take a bit of exception in the comment that we are doing a rush process. This reset is 13 years in the making. I don't think we can say this has been rushed. But definitely, if there is a need to refund, we will enjoy that in the form of rebates or reduction in our transmission charges. That's how we will be able to see the effect of this reset.
And that would reflect in the Meralco bills, correct?
Correct.
If not the final amount, how long do you expect this to? How much longer do you expect this to take?
Okay, we're completing the process. There are some, as I mentioned earlier, a period for comment, and then we'll proceed with the final determination and complete also. What we have released is a partial determination only for 2016 to 2020. We're completing now the review for 2021 to 2022, and we're targeting the end of the year to complete everything and release the final determination, so that by start of next year we have a fresh set of rates.
Right, and just for transparency, one quick question, Attorney. You mentioned that the NGCP can comment still based on whatever you release. Yeah, but can they also, so to speak, argue or debate against it, maybe through a legal process?
I suppose you're referring to going to the courts to question it.
Yes.
They of course, we don't know what remedies they are exploring, but it may be premature, because as I mentioned, the what we had released is not yet final. So it's not yet there are certain requirements for judicial review. I'm sure the lawyers of NGCP would know that. The courts definitely would look into that. So there's no ripeness yet. In legal terms, the issue is not yet ripe, because what we have just issued is a draft determination giving precisely the opportunity to the regulated entity to comment.
Okay, we'll have to keep following this story then, and leave that there for now. Thank you so much for joining us, ERC Chairperson.
Thank you. Good evening.
Attorney Monalisa Dimalanta.
Right, pausing for a quick break for now. Right after that, the Philippine economy glows red hot in the third quarter, with GDP growth hitting 5.9%, the fastest expansion among emerging economies in Asia. More on that when the big story returns. Keep it here.
Welcome back. You're still watching Big Story here on One News. Okay, more good news. The Philippine economy bounced back big in the third quarter of this year. GDP grew by 5.9% in the third quarter, beating estimates off the back of increased public spending. That's higher than the 4.3% logged in the second quarter. Government spending rose by 6.7%, and the country also got a boost from exports. Household consumption grew 5% in that same period, tempered by rising commodity prices. And speaking of higher commodity prices, the Bangko Sentral sees inflation exceeding its outlook for the rest of the year. The BSP has now hiked its inflation forecast to 6.2% from 5.8%, citing the higher than expected September inflation print, the provisional jeepney fare hike, and of course, upside risks from El Nino.
Well, you know what? I like the good news that government...
2%.
No, but I like that government finally has upped their spending because household spending has gone down.
Pero underspending pa rin ang problema eh. Kahit na they spent more, but they're still underspending.
But at least they're moving because...
moving in the right direction.
Moving in the right direction because household consumption slumping has to be taken up by higher public spending.
To be offset. And they've got a lot of they need to do a lot of catch-up, basically.
Well, this growth is because of public spending.
Yes. So that's, at least
What
they're on
about
the right track, as
inflation?
we said. Inflation is not on the right track. It's going the wrong way. 6.2%. That's up. That's higher than what the Bangko Sentral forecast for the year. Unfortunately, so a little bit of tightening our belt still through to December 2023. Hopefully, it comes down by early next year, because of course this is the Christmas period, so we do know historically mataas talaga yung spending around this time.
And just some context, right? Of course, we are bannering that we have the fastest growth in the third quarter amongst our peers in the region.
Good news, of course.
It is good news. Like Philippines 5.9, Vietnam 5.3, China 4.9, Indonesia also 4.9, and Malaysia 3.3. But as Regina knows, I always like to say this, I wish we would feel that growth more on the ground. Why is this not happening? Right? Like if you compare, okay, maybe China grew slower or Indonesia,
Vietnam.
Vietnam.
It could be because of the election spending during the Barangay and SK elections. That could be a contributor to the economic growth, right? Although there have been growth spoilers, household consumption has slumped to 5%. The slowest recorded since the 4.8% recorded in the second quarter. So, I mean, there might be other things that are, influencing this economic growth, right? As you mentioned. Kasi public spending is higher, but that doesn't mean that prices are getting lower.
No, it doesn't at all. And it does not mean, just because the numbers are good, that people are automatically going to have a better life.
Yeah,
pero
of course.
Actually, aaminin ko, nagulat ako nung nakita ko yung
number.
Yung numbers na to, na we were on track to have the fastest growth in the region. Parang naisip ko, fake news ba to?
Totoo ba?
Totoo ba? Kasi nga, that's what we don't feel on ground, right? With the inflation.
Context, for several years now, actually, the Philippines has been amongst the fastest growing in Southeast Asia. Totoo naman that there is, we're on the
rising,
up, basically. We're on the, what do you call that?
Upward trajectory.
Upward trajectory. There's just some quarters, like in the second quarter, when suddenly it slows down. Like the figure in second quarter is what, 4.3%, and they were expecting 6%, which is in any context a really extremely fantastic figure, right? In any country in the world, if you get 6%, they're super happy with that, right? In Singapore, they're happy with 2% growth, right? So we have
the potential for growth is
we have low base,
huge.
kasi nga we have a mountain to climb. So we are on the right track. So hindi siya fake news. For quite a while now, we have been one of the fastest growing in Southeast Asia. It's just that some quarters we miss kasi ang taas na expectations to begin with.
Thanks for putting that into context, because if you see the other problems that we have,
it's a little bit hard to believe, right? Sometimes.
Diba?
All right, I'm getting a signal from Marie that we're running out of time. But before we go, there's just our big picture for tonight. Not so good news, chest-deep floods that affected 7 barangays in Davao City. Now, this flooding was caused by incessant rains from the easterlies or hot air blowing in from the Pacific Ocean. In Barangay Galera, the flood is almost as high as the roofs of houses. With this, several residents were immediately evacuated while classes in some areas were suspended. But as of this afternoon, the weather has already improved around Davao City. Grabe, you know, they would always say that Davao City, maganda dito, yung agri namin kasi hindi binabaha. But I guess climate change has
Climate
been changing
change
things.
is going to affect every area pretty much. No one's is spared from it.
Oh, gaya nga sabi ni Mayor Romualdez yesterday. Nung tinanong ko siya kung hindi na ba sila tinatamaan ng bagyo dahil puro nasa north na, nasa Cagayan area.
Yeah,
we
you're
shouldn't,
right.
speak ahead of ourselves kasi yun na, sinabi niya dati hindi naman kami tinatamaan dito pero tinamaan sila at napakalakas pa.
Yes, so I guess the lesson here is be prepared all the time.
Speaking of agri, just very quickly, there was an interesting piece of news today with the DA hoping to revive a proposal for half-cup rice.
Yes!
Very controversial because it's divided a lot of people. Ako personally, I'm like, it makes sense.
Well, the
rin,
point,
personally,
the point
it
of that was not to waste
Yes.
the rice that we have.
Yes.
And I like that they price because honestly, pag kumakain ako ng rice, alam ko yung restaurant sobrang dami. Tapos hindi naman ako ganun
The
kagutom.
tendency is to finish it.
No,
pa rin.
I'll tell them, ate, half mo na lang.
Yeah.
But the problem is, yung bill, full price pa rin. So I like that because then I can just pay for what I actually consume and nothing goes to
That
waste.
is if they bring down the prices in accordance with the smaller servings, right? What if they keep the prices the
So,
same, pero
wala-
mas konti? People will feel shortchanged, right?
Yeah. So
Feeling
I
mo,
feel,
lugi ka.
hindi, feeling ko dapat, kung pag may option na half rice, hindi ba dapat may option din na half price lang yung
Oh,
magbayad?
tama naman. So don't get defensive about this the proposition because it won't take away, it doesn't tell you to eat less rice. It
Yeah.
just gives you more options.
More options.
More
Right.
options. Especially for people who are more health conscious.
Alam mo naman mga
who don't want to
Pinoy,
eat
pagka
rice.
sinabi na half rice lang, defensive sa kanan.
Don't touch my rice.
Yeah, don't touch my
All right, that's it for the show tonight.
We're One News, all sides, all the time.
Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night.
Nagutom ako.